Okay, so let's go ahead and re-summarize what we've done so far. So we've kind of come up with this problem statement where your boss is kind of asking you, hey, we're invested in all of these companies. They all have different risk models and different percentages that we've invested in them. And they all have different sort of scores. So we want to take a universal score of the previous year, right? We want to somehow unify all of these scores that we've gotten to get one single percentage number that sort of calculates our risk. And we want to compare it to the current year. And that way we have a very clear comparison between the current year and the previous year to see whether or not we've gotten more or less risky in our investments. So the first thing we did was we opened up NetBeans and we created a new investment project which has this investment class. So this investment class is abstract because all of the investments that we have, right, regardless of whether it's using a checklist model or a grading model or a pass-fail model, all of these investments have certain things that are common to them. They all have a name or the company that you're invested in, and they all have a percentage of the portfolio that we're invested in them by. So we can keep all of this in a superclass, a parent class, right? That means the same thing. A superclass and a parent class are the same thing, and they all have these common properties. And regardless of what we're trying to do or what the type of investment is, we're trying to calculate the risk and then ultimately calculate the weighted risk, which takes whatever percentage this will spit out and multiply it by the percentage of our portfolio. And so you can start to see as we come to our main method a little while later that we'll have a whole bunch of weighted risks and then we can sum them up to get a final number. Okay, so in this video, let's continue on and start creating some of the subclasses or some of the types of investments. So the first we'll create is a checklist investment, right? Because two of our companies, Alice and David, they use a checklist model. Okay, so let's try and deal with those first. So we'll come in and create a new Java class and we'll call it checklist investment. And so what is a checklist investment? Well, it's a type of investment, so we need to put the extends keyword here. Okay, so it's going to give us an error because it wants us to put in all the stuff, the constructor and all the things that you would require of a subclass of an investment. Let's forget about that for now. We'll do that a little bit later. First thing that we want to sort of identify is what are the properties that a checklist investment has that is specific to a checklist investment, so no other type of investment has it. Well, we can kind of see here that all of them have a name, right? Company. All of them have a percentage of the portfolio, but when we start to look at this column, we can see that, they all grade their investments differently. So in this case, it seems that checklist investment has, sort of a score that we create, and it also has a maximum number of points. So these both look like integers. Okay, so let's type that out. So private int, we'll say raw score, right? So this is the score that it got. So, in the real life scenario, I guess some person in some department gathered a checklist and said, okay, they have 7 total criteria and they meet 4 out of them, right? Whatever those are. So the raw score would be the equivalent of 4, and the max score would be also something that is unique to the checklist investment. And so actually I'm going to change these to doubles, and you'll see a little while later why we're going to do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the constructor. And we'll initialize all the fields. Okay, so this checklist investment has the raw score, the max score, the string, and the integer of the weight. Okay, so the last two come from the superclass, and the raw score and the max score come from this specific class. Then we're going to get our getters and setters. And then finally, we're going to override the calculate risk method, which is what I believe this is kind of complaining about. Implement all abstract methods, okay? So it no longer gives us an error. So what is this calculate risk method? What is this override annotation? Basically, whenever you have an abstract class, and then you subclass it out and create a child class that extends the abstract class, you need to override the abstract method here, right? Because over here, like I said, we made a promise that at some point we're going to actually implement, or we're going to use this calculate risk method. I don't want to say implement because that has a specific meaning in Java. So basically now we're going to create the actual equation by which we're going to calculate the risk. So how do we get the risk? Well, this is sort of a safety net, right? We're calculating the safety of these investments, and then we're going to calculate the risk by getting the inverse percentage of that. So that sounds really complicated, but it's a lot simpler than it sounds. So double safety equals this dot get raw score divided by this dot get max score. Right, so we took this raw score that we got, so in this case 4, and then we divided it by, in this case I think there's 7 checklists, 7 points on the checklist. And so now we're getting the actual percentage. And then the risk, double risk equals 1 minus safety, right? Because this is, we got 4 out of 7 correct, or 4 out of 7 as a measure of safety. The 3 out of 7 is actually what we want to calculate because that's the actual risk that we have. And then we're going to return that number, okay? And the last thing is we want to convert it to a percentage. So why don't we come back up here and multiply it by 100. Okay, so we've actually just calculated the risk for a checklist investment. Okay, so we'll do the same thing with the other sorts of investments. And again, if it sounds sort of complicated or abstract, don't worry about it. We're going to do it 2 more times and you'll sort of see this same pattern emerge. So I'll stop it for now because I think this video is getting kind of long, and when I come back we'll move on to the next type of investment.